So the first question is, what is your stance on guaranteeing a monthly UBI and/or hazard pay for the duration of the crisis?
Well, unfortunately, during this crisis, people have unnecessarily lost income when our federal government should have stepped in and handed $2,000 a month for every individual over the period of this crisis and for 3 months after that, or at least 3 months after that. And I think the more we delay that, the worse the conditions get, and the more people are losing their jobs and their livelihood. So I would totally make sure to extend that $2,000 a month to folks. But for hazard pay, it should be it should be passed for whether we're in a crisis or not. People have not been receiving hazard pay even before the crisis, and that's something that I strongly support, as well as paid family leave.
So with the pandemic, right, and its accompanying economic crisis, we've got to recognize that this is going to be a long and deep challenge for us to get out of it. And certainly believe that we need to make sure that people are able to feed their families, they're able to clothe them, they're able to have roofs over their heads. So I do support a continuation of the programs as necessary that we've already implemented around ensuring that people have a strong unemployment and other benefits to ensure that they can continue to feed their families and clothe their families. As I had mentioned, unfortunately, my family was touched on the healthcare side by the COVID crisis. And I know firsthand the hazards that the healthcare community and others are undergoing to serve us and support us and care for us. And I certainly think it's appropriate for hazard pay for those folks. I think it's important to remember, though, that as well, we got to prepare for the future. We've got to take this opportunity to get training and retraining to all of our people so they can better take advantage of the growth economy. Because before this pandemic, we had huge problems around income and wealth inequality. They will still be with us, and they'll be worse as we go through this. So let's keep our eye on the future as well to invest in our people so that coming out of this, they can get better jobs and more stable jobs.
Yeah, look, I think I'm thrilled that this is one of the first things that you brought up because it's top of mind for everyone right now. And absolutely 100% on board. Here's the thing. I think, as you know, and as College Dems has been clear about, a single $1,200 payment just doesn't cut it for most workers, especially frontline essential workers in this moment. And, we cannot be asking frontline workers to have to choose between paying their rent and paying for groceries. But that's what we're going to do for tens of millions of Americans who are out of work right now as a result of this crisis. And so, that's why I think that Congress needs to do far more for renters. It needs to do far more for homeowners who can't afford their mortgage payments. It needs to do far more for small businesses than just the Paycheck Protection Plan, which, that's great, but that's just one part of what small businesses have to do. I've been interviewing, small business owners who have no idea how they're going to pay their rent or pay for their inventory. And that's just heartbreaking. And then, look, in any of these reopening plans, what concerns me is that frontline workers and workers generally I feel like, have not been given the voice that they need in these conversations, which should be central. Nurses are telling me that they still don't have the protective equipment they need. Workers still don't have emergency paid sick leave. They don't have childcare. They don't have the things that they need to stay safe and be able to not have to choose between their livelihood and risking their safety or not knowing what to do with their children. And we still don't have the universal contact tracing and testing that we need to really feel comfortable that our workers are safe and cared for and not being exposed unnecessarily. So I'm glad that you started with that. And I think it's just one piece of what we need to do to address a problem that's laid bare all these underlying disparities and inequities that were already present and had been for years in our system.
No question we need hazard pay, and we've been actively fighting for that for our frontline workers. And we've been advocating for a minimum $2,000 a month for at least the next 4 months, with additional pay for folks who are supporting children in their families. Listen, a one-time $1,200 check, quite frankly, is BS. And anything who knows anything about the needs of working families has to understand that. What Canada has done is much more reasonable. Folks need more money in their pockets. They need a more reliable timeline to understand that they'll be able to put a roof over their heads and food on their plates in the future. And that's money that we need back in the economy as people are spending and making sure that we're keeping our economy as strong as possible in these hard times.
I would support that. In the $2,000 to $3,000 range, I would support a universal basic income even without the COVID-19 crisis if I thought it would actually pass. I do support an $18 per hour minimum wage too. It's clear that low-income people have been getting the short end of the stick for about 40 years now. If you look at the history of minimum wage, it kind of shows it keeping up with inflation till about 1980, and after that it just stays flat while inflation keeps going up. So, you know, a minimum wage job is it's worth less than half of what it was in 1980 in terms of real dollars.
Well, I think that we are in an unprecedented crisis. I think there's going to be a pre-COVID America and a post-COVID America. And what we have to commit to as a country is that we leave this crisis a more fair, a more inclusive, a more just country, because the crisis is showing these stark injustices. I think that we have to put people to work. I've actually come out for 1 million young people in national service jobs. I came out with a plan to save small businesses. I think that rather than having just a monthly income, I want to put people to work. I think people should be able to use their unemployment income as a voucher to go get a job. So I think what we need to do is, UBI is good, but I think even better is making sure people have jobs. And I have a comprehensive plan on my website that actually shows how we can put people to work and deal with this crisis and not have 40 million unemployed, which is where we're headed right now.
Thanks for that question. As a social epidemiologist, I believe that it is very, very important to guarantee an income to people who are displaced because either they can't work, they're sick, or they've lost their jobs. So I'm in full support of some sort of universal basic income or hazard pay. And I'm also in support for those who are working, that we guarantee that they have personal protective equipment. And I'm not talking just about healthcare workers. I'm talking about the people who are delivering our mail, who are working in grocery stores, cleaning for all of us. So I believe strongly that workers' rights in terms of financial compensation and their health protection is a critical part of saving lives and reopening the economy responsibly.
I love this question. So I'm very much a progressive candidate. And I'm also very much, I believe, the only candidate who's currently on unemployment because I just couldn't work full time and also do this at the same time. So I wouldn't be able to run this campaign without the financial support that our country has provided people. Frankly, I think that the reason that we don't have more representation of people who actually represent the issues is because of the financial restraints from actually running an election. So when it comes to UBI during this crisis, I think that it goes, for me, it's a no-brainer. It's people are struggling. And either we cut the expenses by having a moratorium on mortgages and rents, or we subsidize those expenses at a national level, chiefly through the amazing wealth that has been accumulated by both corporations and individuals. And so those resources need to be taxed during national emergencies, and this is one of those times.
Thanks, Cameron. I think that's absolutely important. I think this is exactly what universal basic income was meant to before, when we have periods like this now. And we're seeing some coming out of the HEROES Act, but they're one-time payments instead of monthly payments. And it's not just a universal basic income. I mean, we need to look at where's the PPE for our frontline workers. We need to make sure that everyone has health care, because we're seeing now that when one person doesn't have it, when one immigrant doesn't have it, we're all in danger, and so are they. So we need universal health care to come with it as well. We also need to make sure that everyone can get driver's license during this time, because that's the best way for people to get to and from work when they are essential frontline workers instead of the public transportation. We also need to make sure that we are forgiving student debt during this time. Over several months. We see that the HEROES Act has a little bit of that, but I think we have to push for a lot more. We also need to make sure that there's a federal standard to testing and getting the data for the testing and treatment, because we all know that there's been major structural inequities going on here, and especially the communities of color, the brown and black communities are being affected most, and we don't have that data. We're not collecting it, and we're not sharing it, and there's no federal standard. So those are a few things that I would take care of immediately.
Well, we absolutely need to be protecting our frontline workers, and we need to be ensuring that those who have been thrown on the unemployment rolls overnight are able to make their essential bills, rent, food, prescription drugs. We're seeing unemployment above 20% in Massachusetts right now. And that's affecting families, and that's affecting senior citizens. So I am in favor of continuing our unemployment benefits at their higher rate, which is an important way to make sure that nobody is getting left behind during this crisis and then during the recovery. But the most important thing we should be focused on is jobs. We are not going to get out of this crisis until we ensure that everybody has a job with a living wage and a dignified retirement.
Well, I definitely think that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans suggesting that a $1,200 payment on one occasion is supposed to be enough for families is laughable, and that we need to be doing way more to support families, and ongoing cash payments should certainly be part of it. I think that there's a lot of other things in the short term that also go hand in hand with that, including more relief for small businesses. We can see, there's even more news about it this morning, that unemployment is spiraling out of control, and as high as perhaps 25% at this point, and we need more decisive action to stop that, as well as expanded food assistance as lines at food banks proliferate everywhere. And ensuring that our municipal and state governments have the resources they need to be providing basic services like education and law enforcement that keep our communities running. And then more long-term, I think it's also incredibly important that we are rethinking some of our priorities and how we can build a fair economy that works for everybody, including raising the minimum wage to a living wage, investing in universal pre-K and quality, affordable childcare so every young family and child has what they need to get off on the right track, and to be making smart, sustainable investments to put millions of people back to work eventually when the time is right and appropriate, to confront our greatest long-term threat, which is climate change.